Hi, I'm Philip.
I'm Craig.
And I'm Susan.
And this is a video tutorial on how to assemble the blanket coat for the blanket coat project that we're working on. So some of the things you'll need to be able to sew one of the blanket coats is access to a sewing machine. And if you have one, a serger is a great tool as well. We'll be demonstrating how to make the coats using industrial equipment, but you can use domestic home equipment as well. If you don't have access to a serger, using a zigzag stitch on your home domestic machine is a fine alternative where we suggest serging. Some of the other things that you'll need to be able to sew the coat is, of course, some sewing thread, access to an iron, a small pair of sewing scissors. If you have either a collar board or a sleeve board, these will help to press seams open. If you don't have access to one of those things, the handle for a broomstick works really well too. Of course, the other thing that you're going to need is a pre-cut bundle of the pieces to assemble to make the coat. The pieces that need to be assembled for your coat. So we have two pieces, long skinny pieces that make up the belt or scarf piece. We have two pieces that make up the hood here, the lining of the hood. On the plaid pieces, we've made this a bit easier. We've cut the outside of the hood in one piece instead of two pieces, so there's a little less matching to happen. You'll find the pieces for the pockets and the pocket linings. You will find the sleeves and the sleeve linings. And you will find the body of the jacket and the lining of the jacket. Depending on the width of the fabric that we've been donated, you will find sometimes there is a center back seam on the jacket, and sometimes the piece is cut as one entire thing. So here we've got the body of this jacket is cut in one piece with no center back seam. And in the gray lining pieces that we'll be working on in this demonstration, you will see that there are two pieces, a separate center back with a center back seam due to the limitations on the width of fabric we were working with. Depending on your skill level, we've estimated that taking on the construction of one of the blanket coats will take somewhere between 2 hours for an advanced sewer and 6 hours for a beginner, and they're somewhere in the middle there as an intermediate sewer. Video for intermediary to beginner sewers. So of course, if you are more advanced of a sewer, you may find there's some more efficiencies to sewing more seams together all at once and then going to the iron at one time. And, you know, for example, taking multiple coats on at once and sewing all of the components together. And of course, we encourage you to do that if that's the level that you're at, and to take an approach that's more efficient for your time. Of course, this video is intended more for the beginner and intermediary sewer.
So our first step in the process is to put together the pocket and pocket lining. You can see it's a rectangle where the small end of the rectangle will be the top. I'm going to take the right side of the pocket, right side of the pocket lining, put them together. And then just going around the outside at a 1/4 inch. I'm just putting pins at the corner so we can keep it nice and even.
So Craig, you've sewn around 3 sides of the...
Yes, 3 sides and leaving the top open for the moment.
All right.
Okay, so here we are at the iron, and we're going to press open the pocket. First up, we're just going to trim the corners. Not too close to the stitch line, so you make sure that you're not going to cut through the stitches. And using our board or whatever you have to be able to do this, going to just press open the seam on the side. The other side. And if you're able to do the bottom, do that as well. And then we're going to take a knitting needle or pencil or scissors if you're very careful to just turn this out and make sure the corners are poked out. And then we are going to press the whole thing flat from the lining side so you can see the outside fabric just rolling inwards a little bit so that you won't see the lining on the outside.
Can you give us any tips on pressing wool?
You want to make sure you're using a lot of pressure. And just make sure you keep the iron on it until it's dry.
Dry, yes. That's always what I remember. Steam and then dry it well.
And then if you look at it from the right side and just give the whole thing one quick press to make sure it's all nice and flat.
Yeah. If you're at home using a domestic iron without the steam that we have, what I find quite helpful is if you have a block of wood, to hit your piece with a block of wood afterwards to help get it into shape. If you don't have a block of wood either, sometimes just leaving it to sit on the table to dry a little bit will help it to stay into shape.
Yes, and then the last step is to just turn down this edge. Use a ruler to see it's about 1 inch. and then press that flat. Because we have a very thick lining here, the lining is sticking out a little bit from that turn, and we can just cut off that extra so it's nice and neat. And then the final step in this is we're going to top stitch this top edge of the pocket. Just make sure that the end that's turned in there is just back a little bit from the edge so it's not sticking out like that when you've top stitched it. And we're going to top stitch at 3/4 of an inch. Again, tucking in this side, pinning it if you need to. Taking out your pin before you get to it. And then a second row at 1/4 inch. There you have it.
The paper pattern looks like that you may not be receiving when you get it. And you'll see that there is two what we call drill holes on each side of the front of the coat that mark where the pockets gets placed. And we have drilled and burned a hole through the fabric so that you can find these placements. So you'll find when you go to the real fronts of the jackets, if you come to the fronts, you'll be able to find, we've tried to make them something a bit more substantial that you're able to find. So you can see here are the two holes for the top of the pocket placement that you'll be looking to find on the fronts of the body of your jacket. So these are not present on the lining of the jacket, they're only here on the outside jacket front. So some of the fabrics we have are nice and fluffy and warm, and you might have to look for these holes, but they are there. You want to make sure that you use them and that you cover them when you're sewing the pocket in place.
You can sort of feel where they are, and if you look on the back, should be able to see one and the other. And I'm just going to use pins in order to make it very clear where they are. So this one I'm very sure of, so it's right there. And this one's a bit easier because it's plaid. We just know that it's straight along that line, at least very close to. So now we have our 2 points. I'm going to take the pocket. The 2 edges here should be outside of the drill points, and we should position them just above so that the pocket is covering the holes. And I'm just going to pin the pocket in place. Again, because we have the plaid, I'm just going to make sure that it is on line. And then this should go straight down. We have a little line here that I'm following to just see that it's about the same distance here and here.
And if you happen to get a coat that's not plaid fabric, you would just be making sure that the top and the bottom are the same distance away from the center front edge. Do you mind just pointing the center front edge?
Here and here.
Yeah, so there we go.
And again, on this corner, we have a line here, so I'm just going to follow that and put a pin. And then just using one more at the bottom here to make sure it doesn't turn upwards on me while I'm sewing. And there's no harm in doing the same on the 2 sides. pin. I'm just sewing about 1/8 from the edge of the pocket. Now I'm going to do a second row top stitching for strength, which is going to be in a little bit further, and I'm just going to line up the edge of my presser foot with the previous stitch line.
So about a 1/4 inch top.
About a 1/4 inch.
Just want to point out that Craig's been doing really good back stitch at the top of these pockets. That will just really make sure that they hold on well with lots of use.
And in fact, we will go in afterwards and give it an additional stitching there to reinforce it. And now we're putting in those reinforcing stitches. Just going back and forth a few times.
Looks like I counted 4 times back and forth there.
Just clipping any threads that are sticking out.
Yeah.
And there you have a pocket.
Same to both sides.
You're going to be stitching down this long edge at 1/2 inch.
Right. So how do we tell the difference between the center back and the center front here?
The center front, as you can see here, will have this sort of shape. It will have this large notch at the front, as well as notches like this on the front armhole.
Yeah.
Where the back has a double notch on the armhole.
Yeah. So you notice the back, the top here comes to a bit more of a point and has much less of a curve in the back neckline, right? So, and these lining pieces we had to cut in 2 because of the width of the fabric. So you're sewing down then here at 1/2 inch, right?
Yes.
All right. I think now is another good time to just look at the pattern that we've done so that it's clear. What's happening is you attach the lining to the body of the jacket. And you'll see here, we've got some drill holes that mark buttonhole placements and button placements, which we'll take care of when the coat comes back to us at the shop. But up here on the center front neckline, you'll notice that there is a notch here, and this is an important notch, an important placement. So here we're on that center front edge that Craig pointed out to us earlier, you know, seeing you've got the deeper neckline here and the pointier shoulder on the center front edge. You will find, if you have a look at your fabric, that there is a cut into the fabric here that marks this notch. So when Craig starts talking about bagging out the lining to the front, we're starting at this notch on the neckline and working our way all the way around the coat, front and around the hem of the coat, all the way back up the other side of the front, stopping again at that notch on the other side. So Craig's over here laying the lining with right sides together with the rest of the coat. And you can see here, if we come to the fabric, I'm zooming in close there, you can see that little clip or a little cut there, that notch that you're looking for. So that's going to be where you start and stop sewing while you're working your way around. I'm going to pass it off to you, Craig, again here.
Right, so we're just putting, again, the right sides together. So you want to make sure that at the center back here, the seam that has been pressed open is facing up towards you.
And your pockets are on the inside right now, right?
Pockets are on the inside.
Yeah.
So they should be hidden from you there at the moment. So the lining should also have a notch, but it didn't quite make it through to this layer. So to figure out exactly how it lines up, I'm just laying them on top of each other, making sure it's like that, and I have the notch on the front of the fabric. And I'm just putting a pin through there. Pin here. And we will be sewing all the way around to the other side. Up at this notch here in the neckline. Making sure those notches are lined up. This notch is deeper than it should be, so I'm just making sure that I'm not going above where the cut is. Just making sure I'm below it. So I can see that that is a little bit over 1/2 inch. And the seam allowance here is 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to sew a little bit larger to make sure I take that in. And then as I come towards the long center front edge there, just going to be a 1/4 inch seam allowance.
Now we're working with an automatic machine here, which does this lovely thing where it always stops with the needle in the down position. But if you're on a home sewing machine or another industrial machine that's not automatic, when you're coming to those corners, you'll want to make sure that your needle is down in the fabric before you turn.
Like this, so you can lift up the foot and turn very easily.
Yeah. So you're continuing down the center front edge here at 1/4 inch, right?
Yes. And sometimes I find it's helpful to have my hand on the inside here, sort of push the lining a little bit and make sure that it's even and not gathering up.
Sew with both hands.
Yes, always. I'm coming up on the hem, the bottom of the coat here. And we're just going to reach that corner. Again, needle down and pivot and keep sewing at a 1/4 inch. Pressing open the seam the whole way around, and then turning the whole thing out and pressing it flat. To prepare for that, you need to take a pair of scissors, and like we did on the pocket, we're just clipping the corners, making sure you are not cutting the actual stitches. And right here we have this notch.
Let's lay that out a little bit flatter so
Yes.
people can see. Yeah.
So our notch right here, that is where we stopped stitching.
Yeah.
You're just going to trim in close to the stitching line. So that is just open like that.
Yeah.
And we also want to make sure to get the corners by the hem on both sides. And then back up to the other side, center front. And clipping in where we stopped stitching on the other side.
Very good.
Might use a pencil or something else that's just long and pointy.
Chopsticks are really good too.
Yes, they really are. And just poking out those corners. Using my finger first and then just adjusting it with the point of the knitting needle. And just being careful I don't poke all the way through and break the stitches. And then once I have those corners out, like on the pockets, I'm going to lay it flat with the lining on top. And so that the edges are about even. Just pressing flat the whole way around. As you get closer to the bottom here, it's better to have it rolling in just a little bit. Might find you need to give it a bit of steam and adjust it by hand to get it all sitting nice. Moving on to the hem of the coat now. So now that we have it all nicely pressed, we're going to do a top stitch on the coat at 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to start by lowering the needle and just fitting it right in that corner there. So we can start it off going straight down to 3/4 of an inch. Didn't quite make it. About there.
Again, you can draw some of these corners on for yourself first if you're struggling with it.
Absolutely.
And while we're at kind of like a, oops. Yeah, I'm gonna get you to pause there on the top stitching for just a second, Craig, because what I want everybody to see is on the neckline here, that's the notch that we clipped out, right? So this is where we started and stopped sewing when we turned the coat out, and this is the corner that we clipped out into. So here is all nice and clean and pressed out, and here is the notch that we clipped in all the raw seam allowance coming out into the neckline. Sorry about that. That's a...
No, good to point out.
And you're gonna do this 3/4 of an inch all the way around, right, Craig?
That's right.
All the way down the center front, around the bottom, and back up the center front.
The first one will be just halfway between my 3/4 mark there and the edge, which will be about 3/8, but really I'm just going to eyeball that one. And then one above that line that's going to be at 1 1/4 inches. So I'm just starting all the way at the edge there.
And why are we doing these extra rows of top stitching?
These will just help it reinforce the hem of the coat so it becomes a bit more stiff, as well as keeping the lining from drooping down below the edge of the coat, so you won't see it as you're wearing it.
Just giving it a good press after you've top stitched everything, and here you can see the hem with its 2 extra rows of top stitching there. So we have the coat front, the coat body turned out, and what we're left with is raw edges around the neckline and the shoulder. That's the back shoulder, back neckline as we're coming around the coat. And what we want to do is line these lining and the body of the coat up together, and we want to clean finish these seams. So we're going to take this to the serger, and we're just going to start at one far edge and serge all the way around the whole thing to give that a clean finish. If you're a beginner, you may want to lay it flat, use some pins like we did when we were bagging this out, and just machine base close to the edges before going to the serger. If you're more intermediate or advanced, depending on your comfort level and skill level, you can take this just straight to the serger and just go straight to serging. So we're going to take it straight to the serger and just serge off those edges. But you can see that's what we're looking at, is the kind of top of the coat. It is clean finished now around the front and the hem of the coat. So we're just looking then at those top edges there.
When you have your sleeve pieces ready to sew, it's important to take a look at them and make sure you align them so that they are a mirror image. Sometimes when you have pieces that are the same and you can't easily tell the front and back of the fabric, it's easy to mix up the pattern pieces. and sew the sleeves incorrectly. So if you lay them out like this first, look at them with right sides up, and then flip them into their sewing positions. We want to put the pieces right sides together. So simply flip them like this. Get them both arranged before you head over to the machine. What we'll be doing is lining up the hem edge of the sleeve. So put these raw edges together and make sure they match. And we'll be sewing them at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back tacking them at either end. I've lined up my raw edges, and I'm going to put the fabric under the foot and get ready to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And of course, the first thing I'll do is back tack. Now, because these are both kind of wiggly fabrics, we want to make sure they stay as closely aligned as possible. So I head out to the other end and put them together and kind of walk back a little ways and make sure the fabric is staying together the same size. And then I feed it in. You can go back and check and make sure your fabric isn't getting out of alignment. You may find that one fabric stretches more than another, and when I can detect this, I put the less stretchy fabric on top, and that kind of makes it easier to sew.
Yeah, so in this case, the gray lining that we're working with
Yes,
on these
I've
coats
been
is much stretchier than the outside fabric. So,
I'm keeping it on the bottom.
and you can see Craig has been doing the same thing while we've been working on the
Yes.
body of the jacket.
Now we're going to press this seam open.
Oh.
Just lay the pieces flat on the ironing board. And it's a small seam, so careful of your fingers. Just point the tip of the iron into the seam and go along gradually, giving some steam and pressure.
It's called pressing. You have to put your weight on the iron.
Yeah. Then when it cools off, it should be. Is it okay if I press them back? It just takes the heat out of it.
Yeah, we're lucky we have a vacuum
Yes.
table that helps us dry things off faster.
Pressing it down like that makes the next step easier. We are now going to fold the sleeve back with its wrong sides together. And we're going to roll this edge so that the seam is right at the apex of the fold. And we're going to give a 3/4 inch top stitch all the way along the edge.
All right.
I found that you might find it handy to put a few pins, one in the middle. I'm just ever so slightly rolling the top of the coat over a little bit, and that is just to keep the lining on the inside. So I put a pin at the center, and then 1/4 of the way along and on the other 1/4. I'm still sewing from the tartan side. And as I put it under, I'm always being mindful to just give an ever so slight roll so that the front is most definitely on the front and the lining is not trying to peek from the underside. So I've got it at the 3/4 line. Now, because it's now a couple of layers and a little bit springy, I'm pressing it down with my fingers as I guide it along the 3/4 inch line. Take out your pins as you get to them. course, back at the end. Will be to serge all around the edge of the sleeve. And we want to line up the edges of both the outer fabric and the lining, and to make sure that we find all our notches and match those up as we go along. There is one in this area, one in the underarm area. And are there more?
There
Yes.
is one up there, yeah.
And there's one getting up at the sleeve cap. Oh, and then there's another one at the sleeve cap.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you'll see there's one down here. This is the back seam of the sleeve. There's one here, the under seam of the sleeve. There's one here, so you're coming up to the front of the jacket, and there's one right up there at the crown. Again, the same as what happened with the body of the coats before we went to the serger. Depending on your skill level and your comfort level, you might want to pre-pin this flat and baste it at the sewing machine first. Susan's a very advanced sewer here, so she's going to take it straight to the serger and just serge, skipping that step. But if you're, depending on your comfort level and your skill level, you may want to baste that together first.
Here we have the hood pieces. Have the lining and we have the self. Because this was plaid, we cut it all in one piece. The piece you have might be two pieces that just look exactly like this. We have the neckline, which you can identify from the notch in it. The face, which is the other flat edge, and the top of the head to the back of the head, which has the curve in it. And on this single piece, you have the face edge, which is the long edge, and then the neckline edge, and this goes along the back of the head, and then the top is here. So what we're about to sew is, we fold this in half. We'll be sewing along the back of the head along to the top, and we'll be sewing at a 1/2 inch, roughly like that, which will taper towards the top of the head to nothing, something like that. And on the lining, remember we have the notch here for the neckline, so we will be sewing all the way along here at a 1/2 inch.
All right.
Nice and easy on the lining, and then on the self, because we had to taper off a little bit like this, I'm just going to cut a little bit further in, just so it'll press open a little bit nicer. If you don't have a piece that is cut in one like this, then it should be exactly the same as the lining. So now Craig is
once you press them, you're putting the
So we are
front edges together,
Yes.
correct? Yeah.
So we're making sure that we see where the notches are that indicate the neckline,
Yeah.
and the straight edge that does not have those notches. We are putting them together, right sides together,
Yeah.
and taking to the machine. Again, help yourself out by putting a few pins, one at either end. And you should have a mark on a notch on the hood, on the self fabric. That should indicate the center back, where it should match with the seam on the lining.
So this is the seam the edge that had no notch.
Correct. And just sewing that at 1/4 inch. Making sure everything's laying flat as you reach the seam there. Sewn, and we are going back to the iron. Pressing that seam open. And then turning it flat. And again, pressing from the lining side so that you can see the face fabric is rolling in towards the lining. And then back over to the machine. And we are stitching along that edge at 3/4 of an inch again. There we have a hood.
Right. And then we're gonna do like we did on the body and the sleeves. And we're gonna come to this raw edge, which is the neckline of the hood. So this is the seam that has the notches on it. and we are just going to serge those raw edges. So again, if you're a beginner and depending on your comfort level, you may want to baste those edges together on the sewing machine first and then serge it. Again, Craig's pretty advanced sewer. He's just going to take this straight to the serger, and we're just going to clean finish that edge of the hood. I just want to point out to everybody, because we're working with some really lofty, squiggly fabrics, you may find after you've serged things together that things are a little wavy or wobbly along the edges. So you can see one here that's just been serged where that's is the case. But giving them just a little bit of a steam and a press before you continue working with them flattens things out and really nice to work with. So you can do that along the top edge of the body of the jacket as well as the sleeves. So here we're seeing the sleeves serged together all the way around, and we can see here that we have a nice mirrored pair. So if you flip them on top of each other, right sides together, they're matching up. You've got a nice mirrored pair there before advancing too far. So the same is going to be true with the hood, which I'm just going to get Craig to throw over to me here, which we have serged together along this bottom edge here. May need just a little small steam press after you've done that to kind of help with any wiggling. And maybe we could just lay out the front of the jacket here quickly. Same thing here, we're looking at the whole top of the jacket, so we've serged around those edges that we spoke about. While we're here actually with the whole coat laid out, Craig, it might be good to sort of start to talk about how we assemble these pieces. We have the body of the coat together, we have the hood put together, and we have the sleeves put together. So we can start putting these components together now to finish off the coat. I'm gonna make my way around here, the other side of the table.
So now that we have all our pieces, we're going to start looking at how they go together. So we have the sleeve here. The top end of the sleeve here that has this large curve corresponds to the front of the coat. So the way we will be lining that up is like this. So it will sew around like this, all the way around. There's notches indicating the whole way.
Yeah.
Until we reach the back here, where this side of the sleeve will match with the back shoulder here.
Yeah, and you know that this side is the back and matching up with the back because there's a set of two notches, double notches side by side that go here. And of course, Craig is showing you right ways together, but what we're going to be doing is putting this coat together, right sides together, right? So we're beginning putting these right sides together, following this sort of wave around the armhole there. Is there anything else you wanted to quickly point out there? Yeah, so we'll start with kind of getting those sleeves into the armhole. As you can see there, that's how it's happening. If you want to lay it out, figure out which one goes where. Again, it's making sure that the sort of narrow pointy side is going to the back or the middle of the body of your coat here, and the wave, if you will, or we call it the crown of the sleeve, is going towards the front there.
Okay, so now that we're at the machine looking at attaching the sleeves, I can find sometimes it's helpful to just go through and use wax or chalk or something to mark where the notches are. So when you're going along, you don't have to stop and look for them, especially once they've been serged over. It can be a bit difficult to find them sometimes.
So how many are there?
So there should be 1, 2, 3, 4. the way
Yeah.
around the sleeve.
Yeah.
So you have one at the back, one on the underarm, one at the front, and then one at the sort of top of the shoulder. And find the sleeve that matches. I find it's a bit easier to start from the back. I'm going to start by lining up these notches. You can see these here, match up these here.
Mm-hmm.
Put a pin in, and then start from the top at 1/2 inch. So then as I reach each notch, I will put a pin in for the next one coming up. To make sure we get all the spacing right. And it should all just flow one to the next pretty easily. You may find the sleeve itself is a little larger once you start getting into this upper portion, at which point you just want to ease in the sleeve a little bit, making sure not to make any tucks in it. So I'm sort of just pushing on the top a little bit to do that easing in.
Yeah.
It's not a whole lot.
Yeah. And you'd rather push at the top a little bit than try to pull the bottom, right?
Yes. Here I am coming towards the end here. And there it is. And then I'll be doing the same on the other side.
Now, the other side, are you still able to start from the center back, or are you starting from the other direction?
No. So now that I have the practice, I'm going to start from the front side. You always want the body on the bottom when you're sewing a sleeve in.
Yeah, so the sleeve is always on the top. So because they're opposites, you're going to be sewing them in opposite directions. So like Craig suggested, sew the sleeve, you can sew from the back first for practice, and then come around to do the sleeve that you do from the front.
Exactly.
We'll get a full video of the other side too, because the sleeve can be confusing.
I'm just doing exactly the same thing, but in reverse. Still making sure to pin all my notches.
So when Craig finishes this off, we'll take it to the table and have a look at kind of what you're looking at when this is put together.
So now what we have is something that looks pretty odd, right? Like we have the sleeve in, but the shoulders aren't together yet. and the sleeves are sort of in an odd position. But what our next step is going to be is putting together those shoulders as well as the side seams of the sleeve. So what we're going to do is, if we turn this up and take our shoulder seam, put it to the shoulder seam on the back, then we can see that we are so along there, and just lead directly into the seam of the sleeve.
Maybe we should unfold that and fold it up one more time.
Yep. Again, we have everything laying flat here. We have the sleeve there.
Yeah. Let's throw the sleeve back down again so we can see that. So that's the sleeve put in, right? So what Craig's done is flip the sleeve back up on itself, and then you're folding the front of the jacket over, and
so there we have the neckline on the back,
yeah,
the neckline on the front,
yeah,
and the shoulder on the back, and the shoulder on the front.
yeah.
And then there is the sleeve.
Yeah. So we're going to sew from this neck point and shoulder a 1/2 inch straight all the way down to the hem of the sleeve. Right? All right.
So just before we get to sewing, we just want to go to the iron, and because our fabric is so thick, we're just going to press down on the sleeve seam, pressing the bulk of the seam into the sleeve.
Right. So this is what we're looking at on the iron here. This is the shoulder here. That is the back shoulder. And just a little bit, like not the whole seam allowance, just kind of like at the edge here, right? You're just pushing this down towards the sleeve. And then same up at the front there, right?
Same on the front.
Yeah. Just for about 2 inches or so, it'll make putting the whole thing together a lot easier. So again, Craig's hand was on the sleeve, and then that's up here is the shoulder of the front there.
Put a little pin where the seams on the armhole line up. And you can see that just laying it flat, the back is a little bit longer than the front, which we have on top. We're just going to line up those edges and ease the bottom in a little bit. And really with fabric like this, the machine just does it itself, or pulls in the bottom. Needed to make sure I had all the seam allowance coming down into the sleeve. Sewing all this at 1/2 inch.
Yep. And we're using a size 16 needle on the sewing machine for this project, just because there are some areas that do get kind of thick.
And this is the one.
This is the thickest spot.
You can see I just broke a thread there. Just not being quite careful enough.
Uh-oh.
Or maybe I have an issue with something else.
Those thick threads, or thick seams.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
I had a bit
bobbin.
of thread jammed up.
Just come over to this machine.
That's all right. Troubleshooting.
Yeah. And just taking it slow, stitch at a time over the thickness. Okay, and I made it that time. So I'm just going to go down to the cuff of the sleeve and make sure that's all going to line up. Put a pin in. So
And you'll
there
do-
we have a sleeve. And we can turn it out to see that now it looks much more like a coat.
So I'll let Craig do the other shoulder, and then we'll come and press that shoulder seam and back sleeve seam open, and have a look at how the coat's coming together. We just have the hood and the belt to do.
Okay, so now that we have the sleeve and shoulder seams sewn up, we just need to press them flat.
Again, we have this nice articulated sleeve board and vacuum, because we do this all day, every day. But you could just use a sleeve board or the collar press, or if it even came down to it, I've used a broomstick.
So once you get to this big bulky seam here where the two sides of the sleeve meet, you really want to make sure you put as much pressure as you can on it to really flatten it out nicely.
Get it really steamy and then dry it off really well. So if your home iron has like a steam function, you want to turn the steam function on, let it steam for a while, and then turn the steam function off and kind of just use the hot iron to dry it off, if you will, so it's not wet anymore.
Same on the other side. Have the face edge here with the top stitching and the neckline here with the serging. The way this will line up is the face edge will meet with this little part that's sticking up that we had serged on top of. We'll be sewing that around, center back, not a seam here on the lining, or a notch if there was not a seam in the lining. Will match with the back seam on the hood and going around to the front.
Yeah, and those little notches that were on the neckline of the hood,
They will match up.
They will match with your shoulder seams.
Just here, like that.
We've got to roll the coat back a little bit more for us.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, there we go.
So we we have a notch right here.
Yeah.
And you can see that these line up, then these line up, and then that will line up.
Yeah. And we'll be placing the hood right sides together. So it's good to lay out the coat like this to make sure that you're going to be putting the hood on correctly. And then if you will, Craig could pinch the center back seam or along one of the edges there, and you'll be putting these together with the body side together. So the in this case it's the tartan side or the plaid side going together, and we'll be stitching that whole seam at 1/2 inch.
Yes.
All right.
So I like to start with needle in the down position, so you can get nice and close into that corner there. And then we lay in the hood at that 1/2 inch seam allowance. Give it a good back tack there. And of course that's trouble. Try that again. So get that needle into the corner, line up the edge of the hood, that benchmark, and then roll along and find your notch for the shoulder. Give yourself a pin there. And then you'll have a notch on the back of the body for the center back of the hood there. Then your other shoulder. And then we'll be coming around to the other front edge and just making sure those line up nicely. And then once you have that, you can just go straight ahead and turn the seam down towards the body of the coat and give it a top stitch at about 1/4 inch.
So I'm just going to say that again. So what Craig's doing now is he's working from the inside of the coat. He's pushing the seam allowance of the neckline and the hood down into the body of the coat. And we're just top stitching down at 1/4 inch. And this just holds the bulk of all the seams nice down and inward into the coat. You know, and for the sake of keeping the blanket coats as a project that beginner and intermediary sewers can work on, and for the sake of you know, being able to produce the coziest and most efficient coat possible, you can see, you know, we've clean finished many areas of the coat, but this is one of those kind of few areas where we just have the nice serging or zigzag stitching in there along the neckline and that shoulder seam. is amazing. It's finishing up the whole coat. The only thing we have left to look at is the belt slash scarf of the coat. So Craig pulls that off. I think you should throw it on.
Sure. Like that.
Yeah, we've tried this on a number of bodies. The intent is a one size fits all. Of course, there's some buttons and buttonholes that we'll put into the coats when they come back to the shop before we distribute them. Yeah, and our last step then is the belt, and then we've got the hood. Awesome, thanks, Craig.
So the final piece of the coat that we're going to work on is the belt. We just cut from the offcuts of the coat when the whole piece was being cut out. Because this one's plaid, we want it to roughly match. So we're just going to see those lined up. We're going to stitch that at a 1/2 inch, and you can see that they don't quite line up side to side.
Yeah, and this was like in the interest of, you know, making sure that we had a belt slash scarf for the coat, but being sort of more sustainable in our cutting. So making it from what was left of the offcuts was what made the most sense. And that's why you can see they're not always exactly the same. And we're just going to kind of make them work from what Craig's going to demonstrate here.
Right, so our first step is we've roughly lined those up, and we're just going to stitch that at 1/2 inch.
All right.
So I have the two pieces joined now at a 1/2 inch. Because this is the selvage of the fabric, it doesn't need to be finished in any additional way. But I'm going to now cut down the extra bits of the fabric. So I can see that here it comes down to the narrowest point along there. I'm trying to just keep it with the rough edge of the plaid lines that are there.
Some of you at some point may be working with the fabric that's not plaid, that we're not worrying about trying to match up. And in that case, you just want to make sure that both sides of the belt end up being the same width.
Yes.
Here we've got a nice plaid line to cut along.
One side, and then on this bottom edge, just runs out a little bit here, so we'll just even that out. And then on it, this side, just keeping with that same width. There's a very faint red line in here that I'm following. So now we have a belt that is the same width the whole way across, and we're just going to serge both edges. Again, we have the selvage at the other end here, so we don't need to finish that end. But the long edges will serge, and then turn them over and stitch.
And here you can see we've got a finished belt, so it's been serged along those raw edges. From the right side, it's been turned back and just stitched at 1/2 inch, and then we've given it a nice little press, and then we've got a nice belt to keep the coat cozy, warm around the waist. We've kept this as a separate piece so that it could also double as a scarf if need be. And here we've got Craig again modeling the finished coat.
And it's just made very long, so you can wrap it around twice, really get a lot of warmth out of it. And then back at the shop here, we'll put on buttons and buttonholes. And there we have it.
Yeah. And thank you very much, everyone, for your efforts. We look forward to sharing more. When the coats come back to us, they'll get marked for buttons and buttonholes before we take them out.